Hello, guys and gals, me Mudahar, and we have some pretty good news this evening, ladies and gentlemen. Now, for the last 2 weeks, I've been talking about this AI bubble popping. And it used to be a year ago that, if I talked about this kind of stuff, there'd be a bunch of comments going, oh, there is no bubble, Muda. Now I'm pretty sure everybody can understand that there is, in fact, a actual serious bubble that needs to pop, just for the benefit of all of us people that enjoy tech. But generally speaking, something as overvalued as this technology needs a bit of correction, especially since it's kind of been ruining a lot of people's shit. It's kind of been ruining everything else. I talked about the Internet Archive literally a day ago. And to me, stuff like that is serious. I don't like it when big AI companies come in and ruin shit around me. So why am I talking about this bubble popping again? Well, it just keeps accelerating. Now, I consider this to be really, really good news because, again, for this bubble to pop, yeah, sure, it means, like, economically things do get rough because fucking everyone and their grandmother, unfortunately, with or without their consent, have kind of invested into this stuff. To the point where, when it pops, the damages, at least from what I understand economically, will probably resemble that of like 2008, okay? It's gonna be rough for a little bit. But like a lot of rough points in life, you grit your teeth, you bear through the pain, and usually when you come out the other side of the tunnel, things are a lot better. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, to look at why this has been crashing down, one of the things that has sort of been popped up, and you probably heard headlines like Anthropic, the company that makes Claude and that super spooky mythos. Yeah, they were changing pricing to their bills when they were billing firms, basically companies, based on AI use, right? So basically, the way that apparently this pricing has sort of changed, again, if you don't want to pay for this kind of article and kind of read about it, has basically been a point where it's kind of resembling that of what happened like 10 days ago. When Claude, the Claude is the product, Anthropic is the company, basically said that when you're using things like third-party harnesses or things like agents, you're going to have to end up paying for them as you go. So much like filling up your car at the gas station, in order to use the AI for genuinely maybe the only useful thing that it exists for, in my opinion, instead of paying for those $20 plans that, let's be honest, are basically subsidized to begin with, subsidized meaning that you pay 20 bucks to use access to some of their highest end models, but in reality, the higher of a power user you are, which, depending on who you are, you're actually getting a great deal. You're paying $20, and the company is actually losing money on you. Now, this is something that obviously, it's not unknown. I've been talking about artificial intelligence for years, ever since the technology developed. And in a lot of my videos, I show you local artificial intelligence. And I've shown you that even on an RTX 4090, which is not a cheap card, the amount of models that you can run, well, you can only go so far in the model's intelligence. And obviously, the capability and the processing power involved in that model, yeah, it burns through wattage. My GPU uses more resources to run a LLM than honestly running a lot of games with ray tracing, path tracing, and whatnot. It maxes out. It reaches that red line. And you can imagine what happens in a data center where companies like Anthropic pay tens of thousands of dollars for GPUs that cost $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, all plugged up in these arrays, serving millions of people around the fucking world. Those costs add up. The ability to run those cards, that cost adds up. And obviously, cards, they do tend to break after some serious use. So switching out a $30,000 card for another card, these are all prices that I'm sure a lot of these AI companies have put into their heads. And it's one of the reasons that if you've been following things like Claude, for instance, right? And by the way, I'm not an anti-Anthropic guy. I know that I use them as sort of an example, but I genuinely think they're actually one of the best frontier, meaning like closed source companies out there. I think they're genuinely better than ChatGPT. I think they're genuinely fucking better than Google. I think they're better than Grok. That said, there are limitations to this tech. So if you look carefully, a lot of people on Anthropic subreddit have been bitching about the fact that their usages are getting basically cut in half. People are running through their tokens like crazy, and of course, the actual quality of said model is basically dropping. So in some cases, the ability for it to not hallucinate, well, that seems to have been going down all the way to number 10, below some of its contemporaries. So this is not a good situation, okay? It basically means that behind the scenes, a lot of people have kind of theorized that Anthropic has sort of lobotomized the model. Whether that be to save it money, saving money is the key important thing. Now, obviously, this stuff is growing rapidly. For anybody that's following companies like this, they're releasing applications that allow you to plug your computer to their AI so that the AI can control your computer. Now, I think that's a scary world to live in. I think anybody promoting a private company access to your computer to pilfer around and do whatever, even if it's under your surveillance, is never a good thing. And that goes for any company, whether it be an American one or a Chinese one. Always be careful of who the fuck is allowed to pilfer around your system. So again, private companies are integrating all this stuff to their employees and yada, yada, yada. So the scale is going through the roof. Imagine if there's 100 people using your technology. It's definitely difficult to go from 100 people to 1,000 people, to 10,000 people, to 100,000 people. And then it sucks even hard when some of those individuals may in fact be fucking power users. So, literally months ago, you had the CEO of Anthropic going, if my revenue is not 1 trillion, if it's even 800 billion, there's no force on Earth, there's no hedge on Earth that could stop me from going bankrupt if I buy that much compute. Even though a part of my brain wonders if it's going to keep growing 10x, I can't buy $1 trillion a year of compute in 2027. If I'm just off by a year in that rate of growth, or if the growth rate is 5 times a year instead of 10x a year, then you go bankrupt. Basically, these guys rely on an insane level of growth that, unfortunately, I think is kind of hitting that fucking peak, okay? Now look, there's a lot of people that love fucking shit like AI. A lot of internet tech influencers peddle this stuff like it's crack cocaine. But the reality of it is that, look, I'm not somebody that, is getting paid by any of these companies. I'm not getting paid to even shit on these companies. I'm somebody that uses local AIs all the time in my videos, just as a cool little thing to showcase as a technology that is private, self-hosted, yada, yada, yada. But I'll always be there to tell you that it is expensive. It is absolutely a technology that cannot, in my opinion, at least scale to the levels that a lot of these guys are kind of billing you. And look, I like companies like Anthropic. While companies like ChatGPT or OpenAI have backed actual bills, according to this write-up by Wired, where they want to limit things like AI-enabled mass deaths or whatever. Situations where people, unfortunately, by interacting with an LLM, end up killing people around them because they go into actual AI psychosis. You got companies like Anthropic that do tend to push back against that. I have a lot of respect for companies that realize they have a technology and maybe they don't want to contribute that technology to really unethical means. But that being said, it doesn't ignore the reality of how expensive this shit is. So, for instance, this is a site called OpenRouter, and some of you who use AI may know what OpenRouter necessarily is. It's a place where you can basically get one API key, and you can get access to a whole slew of models. Some of these are open source, some of these are from private companies like Anthropic, some of them are from companies like, ZAI from China, and yada, yada, yada. But if you look carefully, one of the things that you should always be understanding of is how expensive shit can be. So for instance, let's say that you're somebody that wants to use the best programming model that exists. Well, you're probably using something like Google's Gemini 3.1. That costs $2 per million input tokens, and then $12 for the output token. So basically, all the words that are printed on your screen, you're paying $12 for 1 million tokens worth of that shit. So these bills, depending on how much you use this AI shit, do tend to fucking rack up, especially if you're going by the usage, but when you're paying per use. Of course, if you look at companies like Anthropic, you can see that for $5 per million input tokens, you're also paying $25 for the million output tokens. So it gets fucking expensive, It's like going to a gas station, filling up gas, the cheap stuff, the what is it, like the E85 octane or whatever, the really shit, the dirt gas, that stuff, costs you, I don't know, like what is it today, like a $1.70 a liter? But if you pay for the premium, super expensive gas, for the nicer cars and whatnot, or just because if you want to pay for some nice gas for your car, you're looking at like what, $2.30? Insanely upcharged. You're paying way more for the higher grade shit. And of course, this is the Chinese stuff, which I don't want to denigrate the actual quality of this. It's definitely not as good, but you can see why some people who are on a stricter budget, especially people that are using things like agents like Hermes, they might choose to pay, like 5, 10, 15 bucks a month, but they're also paying like less than $1 per input and less than $3 for a million output. So yeah, this is the kind of stuff that you're looking at. And obviously, look, for a lot of people, AI stuff is something where I think it's one thing because this technology is built off of so much stolen information, but we're at a point where we're actually like selling information per access to individuals. And the reason why I talk about this AI bubble kind of crashing and popping is that, I've been following the news very carefully. I've been seeing how a lot of these models have sort of become more lobotomized as time goes on. Generally, they're always at kind of a race between each other. But, ever since I saw things like Claude Mythos, which genuinely does seem like really cool stuff, even though I may consider it to be just a bit of marketing fluff, there is, again, a cost attributed to that. Something that powerful, something that computationally expensive, can only really be used not by people that are trusted in cybersecurity, but by people that, are probably going to use it, appropriately, probably are people that when they spend $20,000 on tokens, those tokens will be used effectively. And generally speaking, it's not something you can just give out to everyone to have complete carte blanche access, because you probably don't have the resources to just easily scale that up for tons of people to just come in, even if they are actual paying customers. Because if people really realize the actual fucking cost for AI, like if they actually really did the math, they would realize that this whole market is, either these AI companies have to lobotomize their shit to the point where it's becoming economically viable for them to deliver it at these rates that they currently are, or they just raise them fucking through the roof. It's not uncommon in the tech field for companies like Netflix, for instance, when they first launched, to price themselves underneath everyone, because they had every investor's dollar played around, and they could just say, hey, we'll charge you like 10 bucks a month, come in and stream all the movies you want. But obviously, as the years pass and the user base grows, they're like, fuck it, let's just up the price $1 each year, 12, it goes from like 10 bucks a month to 12 to 13 to 15 to 16, all the way to like $21 a month, 100% increase over it initially started. And again, you might even realize that you may get less out of it, because at that point, the market base has grown so much, they have become so solidified that now they can charge whatever the fuck they want. That's kind of the similar play that you're seeing over here. But there are also other key issues, right? For a lot of these companies, expanding is like the most important fucking thing imaginable. And one of the things that has sort of been happening for anybody that hasn't been noticing is that when it comes to the US alone, about half of the data centers that were supposed to start this year actually turns out that those data centers have either been delayed or in some cases actually been fucking canceled. Now, of course, the reality of a lot of this is that beyond just the cost for the parts, beyond just convincing the community to build this kind of shit, there have been an issue regarding the actual electricity required to run some of these, data centers as well, too. And in some cases, you've got companies like Microsoft that have gone out of their way, and we've looked at this, right? Where Microsoft has come out and said, hey, if we open up a data center near you, we promise that your costs won't go up. But they fucking will, because obviously to then build the infrastructure for the electricity, that cost has to be paid by somebody. And again, if you trust Microsoft to 100% foot the bill for the shit that they're building, I'd like to sell you a bridge currently in my possession. And again, a lot of these things, I think the community has started to catch up to, because I think for a lot of people, they realize, hey, this is a data center, it's moving into my neighborhood, my neighborhood, which I love the nature of, I love my people. All of a sudden, this place is coming in, making things more expensive for the average person. And of course, ultimately, the end, it's not really providing much for my community, as opposed to the stock value of something like Microsoft or Nvidia or fucking Anthropic or whoever owns the fucking data center, right? So it really is a fucked situation. In a lot of cases, too, you've got a scenario where current wars right now, so the war in Iran, which nobody knows when that's going to fucking end, we're getting to a point where forget the gas prices going up. for a lot of these tech guys, they're watching things like helium go up, which helium is very important when it comes to making semiconductor chips, when it comes to, medical equipment, when it comes to a lot of important things in our day-to-day fucking life. So in a lot of ways, the AI bubble is popping incredibly hard. And, I would say that the pop has already happened. I think the reality is kind of settling in for a lot of these companies that, that growth they had in the beginning is sort of limiting. Look, just this year alone, one of the greatest news regarding things like Sora, because, for anybody that doesn't remember, OpenAI made this TikTok style app where you could just go in, generate all the videos you wanted, and they wanted to make it a social media service. Nobody was going to stick around because nobody enjoys AI generated shit. People enjoy real human beings and a real fucking personality. Unfortunately, a lot of these tech companies tried to build a million different things, and unfortunately, while the novelty was cool at first, it seems like many people just aren't really sticking around with it. I think a lot of people are getting generally tired of the AI fatigue that's happening all over the internet, right? People don't care so much for seeing AI-generated videos. People don't care about listening with AI-generated music, right? Because it's just very easy to pick up on how sloppy that stuff can be. It's getting to a point where reading a comment on social media companies or social media services is tiring. 50% of the comments and stuff that I read now on many different sites feels like an LLM wrote it. Somebody connected an agent, they were like, hey, write me a snappy tweet, make sure it's great for impressions, and it just all bleeds together and looks the same. I think the only thing that actually is somewhat useful and an actual use case for AI is stuff like coding. And in this case, things like Anthropic's coding service, which arguably is the only thing I think worth paying for, is actually the thing that, I don't think is going to really appeal to a mass majority of individuals out there, right? I think, for individuals that do coding for a living, that write programs, I don't think that market's going to be necessarily big enough to sustain this organization going further. There are other case uses, right? Obviously, you've got things like people using Claude or ChatGPT to do internet searches. But even in that regard, I've seen a lot of people do a search on ChatGPT, and they're immediately looking through the sources ChatGPT brings before they even try to take what ChatGPT gave as an actual answer. Because in a lot of ways, LLMs do hallucinate. They pull wrong information. So the reality is, if instead of doing a Google search, you were like, I'll let the AI search for me, but you're spending your time reading through the sources the AI pulls, what the fuck is the point? Why not just Google search yourself and read the first top 10 results without burning through tokens to begin with? So I think the usability, the cases for AI stuff has sort of come to a point, a dead stop, where unless you're like one of those power users that loves burning through tokens, whether you're running things like agents or building the 19th application that's already been fucking built already, I don't think that this is a truly sustainable field. That's not to say I think AI will ever go away. I've always said in these videos or anytime I talked about this shit, the technology is already out there. For every private model that exists, there's a lot of open source stuff you can download to do things like generate text, videos, code, do any of that stuff. And while it will never be as good as the big frontier stuff because the parameters aren't all the way there and you don't have access to a fucking billion-dollar data center, I think for most people, generally doing most things, the ability to use local AI to search the internet, to write basic code, to scaffold basic things, is kind of reaching a point. It's kind of getting there. Now look, there's been a lot of advancements too. Google made this thing called TurboQuant, which allows me to run big models with a lot of context on one GPU, something I was never able to do literally weeks ago. So in some cases, there have been some serious big movements that I think have kind of signaled people away from these big monolith companies that effectively have peddled artificial intelligence for years, kind of, in my opinion, expecting like an infinite level of fucking growth. Well, that infinite level of growth is finally starting to chill out a little bit. And the big benefit of that is once people realize that, we're not really getting the real return on investment, when that crash happens, it's going to suck, like I said earlier in the video. But it's going to be a much needed correction because ultimately something's got to give, okay? Something has got to give for things to start getting cheaper, especially when it comes to the tech space, okay? We're already looking at a situation where a fucking PlayStation 6 can cost above $1,000 because just the parts to source the production for that is already becoming an issue for these big companies. So something's gotta fucking give. Other than that, it's either something gives or we actually reach a world where people don't really own their technology. They don't really own their computers. They just own thin clients that effectively get all their compute from these big AI companies that are basically moving all the compute from everyone's systems to them. Anyways, I have a lot to say about this, but ultimately the situation keeps developing. And my stance is, if this bubble pops, it's the most positive shit for humanity. Because, a lot of people conflate it with, do you hate technological progression? No, I don't. I just hate the fact that these companies have basically priced everything that I love out of existence. And ultimately, I don't think they're really providing much shit that is worth the damage that they're causing. And the moment that stops is the best moment that I can ever conceive of lately. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.